TWA Flight 476, New York to Los Angeles, August 1958. The flight was scheduled to depart at 2:15 p.m. At 1:47, Frank Sinatra walked through the gate at Idlewild Airport. He was alone. No bodyguards, no entourage, just Frank in a dark suit, fedora pulled low, carrying a single leather bag. He moved through the terminal quickly, head down, trying not to be recognized. It didn't work. By the time he reached the gate, 3 people had stopped him for autographs. He signed them without smiling, said thank you, kept moving. The gate agent looked up when he approached. Her name tag said Patricia. She was maybe 25, blonde hair pinned back, red lipstick. She recognized him immediately. Mr. Sinatra, she said. Her voice went up slightly. Nervous energy. We have you in first class. Seat 2A. Thanks. She handed him the boarding pass. We're boarding in about 10 minutes. Can I get you anything while you wait? I'm fine. He walked to the window and stood there looking at the plane on the tarmac. Douglas DC-7, 4 propellers, TWA's flagship transcontinental service. The flight would take about 8 hours with 1 refueling stop in Chicago. Behind him, the waiting area was filling up. Business travelers, family, a few other passengers who'd recognized him and were trying not to stare. At 2:05, the gate agent made the boarding announcement. First-class passengers first. Sinatra was the second person on the plane. He walked down the narrow aisle, found his seat 2A window and sat down, put his bag in the overhead compartment, settled in. The seat next to him, 2B, was empty. At 2:12, a man in a gray suit walked down the aisle and stopped at row 2. He was maybe 40, thin, wire-rimmed glasses. He had a briefcase and a newspaper tucked under his arm. He looked at his boarding pass, then at the seat number, then at Sinatra. I think I'm next to you, the man said. Sinatra glanced up, nodded. Looks like it. The man put his briefcase in the overhead compartment and sat down. He didn't say anything else, just opened his newspaper and started reading. Sinatra looked out the window, watched the ground crew loading luggage. The plane filled up slowly, families settling into coach, businessmen reviewing documents, a woman with 2 small children trying to keep them quiet. At 2:23, the cabin door closed. The engines started. One by one, the propellers began to spin. At 2:31, the plane pushed back from the gate. At 2:40, it took off. For the first hour, nobody bothered Sinatra. The man in 2B read his newspaper, occasionally made notes in the margins with a pen. He didn't look at Sinatra, didn't try to make conversation, just read. Sinatra appreciated that. The flight attendant came by with drinks. Coffee for the man in 2B, bourbon for Sinatra. Anything else, Mr. Sinatra? She asked quietly. No, thanks. She moved down the aisle. Sinatra sipped his bourbon and looked out the window. Below, the country stretched out in squares and lines, fields, roads, small towns that looked like models from 30,000 feet. At some point, he dozed off. He woke up when the plane hit turbulence. Not bad turbulence, just enough to jostle the cabin. The seatbelt light came on. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some rough air. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Sinatra looked at his watch. 4:17 p.m. They'd been in the air for about an hour and 40 minutes. The man in 2B had set down his newspaper. He was looking out the window, hands gripped on the armrests. You okay? Sinatra asked. The man turned. I don't like flying. Most people don't. I really don't like flying. The plane dropped suddenly, just a few feet, but enough that a woman in the back screamed. A child started crying. The man's hands tightened on the armrests. His knuckles went white. It's okay, Sinatra said quietly. It's just turbulence. I know what it is. Then you know it's not dangerous. Doesn't make it easier. The plane dropped again, this time harder. The overhead compartments rattled. Someone's bag shifted and thumped against the ceiling. The man closed his eyes. His breathing had quickened. Shallow, fast. Sinatra recognized the signs. Panic. Not full panic yet, but close. Hey, Sinatra said. Look at me. The man opened his eyes. What's your name? Robert. Robert, I've been on 1,000 flights. Maybe more. And I've hit turbulence on probably half of them. You know how many times the plane has gone down? Robert shook his head slightly. 0, Sinatra said. These pilots know what they're doing. The plane is built for this. We're fine. You don't know that. I know the odds. And the odds are so far in our favor, it's not even worth worrying about. The plane shook again, this time sustained. 10 seconds of rough air. The engines whined. The cabin lights flickered once. Robert's breathing was coming faster now. His face had gone pale. Sinatra reached over and put his hand on Robert's forearm. Firm, grounding. Breathe, Sinatra said. Slow, in through your nose, out through your mouth. Robert tried, his breath caught halfway. Again, Sinatra said, slower this time. Robert breathed in, held it, breathed out. Good, keep doing that. For the next 3 minutes the turbulence continued. The plane rocked. The engine strained. Somewhere in the back someone was praying quietly. Sinatra kept his hand on Robert's arm, kept talking. Low, calm. You from New York? Sinatra asked. Robert nodded. Where you headed? Los Angeles. Business meeting. What kind of business? Insurance. I'm an actuary. You calculate risk. Yes. Then you know the numbers. You know how safe flying is. Knowing the numbers doesn't help when you're 30,000 feet in the air, and the plane is shaking like it's gonna fall apart. It's not gonna fall apart. You can't know that. Yeah, Sinatra said quietly. I can, because if this plane was in trouble the pilot would tell us. And he hasn't, which means we're fine. Uncomfortable, but fine. The turbulence began to ease. The shaking smoothed out. The engine steadied. After another minute, the seatbelt light went off. The pilot came back on the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we've cleared the rough air. We're expecting smooth flying from here to Chicago. Sorry for the inconvenience. Robert's breathing had slowed. His hands loosened on the armrests. He looked at Sinatra. Thank you, he said quietly. Sinatra took his hand off Robert's arm. Don't mention it. No, really. I was about to lose it completely. You talked me down. You would have been fine. I don't think so. Sinatra shrugged. Well, you're fine now, that's what matters. Robert was quiet for a moment. Then, can I ask you something? Sure. How do you stay so calm? You're a performer. You're on stage in front of thousands of people. You fly constantly. How do you not let the fear get to you? Sinatra looked at him, really looked at him. Robert's face was still pale. His hands were still trembling slightly, but his eyes were clear. He was asking a real question. I get afraid, Sinatra said, all the time. Robert looked surprised. You do? Yeah, before every show, before every recording session. Every time I step in front of people and open my mouth, there's a voice in my head saying, what if this is the night you forget the words? What if your voice cracks? What if they don't like you? But you don't show it. No, because showing it doesn't help, it just makes it worse. So I breathe, I focus. I do the thing I'm afraid of, and then it's over, and I realize I survive. And the next time it's a little easier. Robert nodded slowly. That's actually really helpful. Good. They sat in silence for a few minutes. The flight attendant came by with more drinks. Coffee for Robert, another bourbon for Sinatra. After she left, Robert said, I feel like I should apologize. For what? For freaking out, for making you deal with that. You didn't make me do anything. I offered. Still, you're Frank Sinatra. You probably have better things to do than calm down a scared insurance actuary. Sinatra smiled slightly. Not right now, I don't. Robert smiled back. Then he picked up his newspaper again, but he didn't read it, he just held it. Can I ask you something else? Robert said after a moment. Go ahead. Why'd you help me? Most people would have just ignored me, pretended not to notice. Sinatra thought about it. Because I've been there, he said finally. Not on a plane, but I've been in that place where you feel like you're losing control and there's nothing you can do to stop it. And when you're in that place, the worst thing someone can do is ignore you. The best thing they can do is just be there. So that's what I did. Robert was quiet for a long time, then he extended his hand. Thank you, he said again. Sinatra shook it. You're welcome. The rest of the flight was smooth. They landed in Chicago at 5:40 p.m. for refueling. Most passengers got off to stretch their legs. Sinatra stayed in his seat. So did Robert. You're not getting off? Robert asked. Nah, I'm comfortable. Me too. They sat there in the quiet cabin. Outside, ground crew moved around the plane. Fueling trucks pulled up. Maintenance checked the engines. After a few minutes, Robert said, I looked you up once. Few years ago, read an article about you. Yeah, it said you were difficult, temperamental, that you didn't suffer fools. Sinatra smiled. That's mostly true. But you were so patient with me, so kind. That's also true. How do those two things go together? Sinatra looked at him. They go together because people aren't simple. I can be impatient with someone who wastes my time and kind to someone who needs help. Those aren't contradictions. They're just different situations. So you're selective about who you're kind to. I'm selective about who I give my time to. There's a difference. Robert thought about that. What's the difference? Time is finite, Sinatra said. I can't be everything to everyone. I can't help everyone who wants something from me, so I choose. I help the people who need it, not the people who just want it. And I needed it. Yeah, you did. Robert nodded slowly. That makes sense. At 6:10, the passengers started reboarding. The cabin filled up again. The same families, the same businessmen, everyone settling back into their seats. At 6:25, the plane took off again. The second leg of the flight was quieter. No turbulence, just smooth air and steady engine. Robert read his newspaper, made more notes, occasionally glanced out the window. Sinatra dozed on and off. The bourbon had made him sleepy. At some point, maybe an hour before landing, Robert folded his newspaper and set it down. "Frank," he said quietly. Sinatra opened his eyes. "Yeah. Can I tell you something?" "Sure." Robert hesitated. Then, "I almost didn't get on this flight. I was at the gate and I had a panic attack. Full blown. I was sweating, couldn't breathe. I thought about turning around and going home. But then I thought about the meeting in LA and how much it mattered. And I forced myself to board. And the whole time I was thinking, I'm gonna die on this plane. I'm gonna die, and it's gonna be because I forced myself to do something I was terrified of." He paused, took a breath. "And then the turbulence hit and I thought, this is it. This is how it ends. But then you started talking to me, and you didn't make me feel stupid for being scared. You didn't tell me to just get over it. You just stayed with me. And now we're about to land in Los Angeles and I'm fine. And I realized something." "What's that?" "That the thing I was most afraid of, dying on this plane, wasn't the real fear. The real fear was being alone when it happened. And you made sure I wasn't alone, even though you didn't know me, even though you had no reason to care." Sinatra didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "I had a reason." "What reason?" "Because someone did the same thing for me once. Long time ago. Different situation, but the same feeling. And I never forgot it. And I told myself if I ever saw someone in that place, I'd do for them what was done for me." Robert smiled. "Who was it who helped you?" "Doesn't matter. Point is, they did. And now you'll do it for someone else. That's how it works." Robert thought about that. Then he extended his hand again. "I hope I see you again sometime," Robert said. Sinatra shook it. "Me too." At 9:52 p.m., the plane touched down at Los Angeles International Airport. The passengers applauded. The engines wound down. The cabin lights came on bright. People started gathering their things, opening overhead compartments, shuffling toward the exit. Sinatra stood, pulled down his bag. Robert did the same. They walked down the aisle together, off the plane, through the gate, into the terminal. At the baggage claim, they shook hands one more time. "Good luck with your meeting," Sinatra said. "Thank you. Good luck with whatever you're doing in Los Angeles." Sinatra smiled. "I'll manage." Robert walked toward the exit. Sinatra watched him go. Then he picked up his bag and headed toward the taxi stand. 3 weeks later, Sinatra was at Capitol Studios recording an album. During a break, his manager walked in with a letter. "This came to the office," the manager said. "Addressed to you personally." Sinatra opened it. Inside was a handwritten note on plain paper. "Dear Mr. Sinatra, I wanted to write to thank you again for what you did on the flight from New York. I know I thanked you at the time, but I don't think I fully expressed how much it meant to me. My meeting in Los Angeles went well. I got the contract. But more importantly, I got on the return flight without panicking. And I've flown twice since then. Each time was easier. You told me that someone helped you once and you never forgot it. Well, I won't forget what you did, and I promise that if I ever see someone who needs help the way I did, I'll do for them what you did for me. Thank you for reminding me that kindness doesn't cost anything, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is just be there. Sincerely, Robert Henderson." Sinatra read the letter twice. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. His manager was watching. "Good news." "Yeah," Sinatra said, "something like that." He went back into the studio and finished the session. Years later, someone asked one of Sinatra's band members what Frank was like when nobody was watching. "Complicated," the band member said. "He could be tough, demanding. He didn't tolerate laziness or dishonesty, but he also had this other side, this quiet kindness that he didn't advertise. You'd see it in little moments, with crew members, with waiters, with people who were struggling." "Like what?" "Like the time a stagehand's kid was sick and Frank paid the hospital bill without telling anyone. Or the time a session musician's car broke down and Frank had it towed and fixed and never mentioned it. Little things, but they added up. Why didn't he publicize that? It would have helped his image." The band member smiled. Because that's not why he did it. He didn't do it for credit. He did it because he thought it was the right thing to do, and the right thing doesn't need an audience. But people thought he was difficult. He was difficult, but difficult doesn't mean cruel. It just means he had standards. And one of his standards was that if someone needed help and he could give it, he did. No questions asked. Even strangers, especially strangers, when you're sitting next to someone who's panicking on a plane and you're Frank Sinatra, someone who could have ignored them, moved seats, or called for the flight attendant, and instead you put your hand on their arm and talk them through it, are you being kind? Or are you being strategic, knowing that small acts of humanity build loyalty and reputation in ways that calculated public gestures never can? And when that person writes you a letter 3 weeks later thanking you, and you keep it in your jacket pocket instead of showing it to anyone, is that humility? Or is that understanding that real power doesn't need witnesses? It just needs to be felt by the person it touches. Because maybe the difference between being difficult and being cruel is knowing when to fight and when to help. And maybe the difference between kindness and performance is whether you do it when nobody's watching. And on that flight, 30,000 feet above America, when the plane shook and a stranger's hands went white on the armrests, Frank Sinatra did something nobody would ever write about in the newspaper. He just stayed. And sometimes staying is the bravest thing you can do.